how do we start, or at least what are the signs that we need to start healing our gut? And then how do we
Yeah,
actually start doing
yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, look, I think the understanding is if you've got something going on in your brain, you've got something going on in your gut, whether you're feeling symptoms or not. We know that the brain's got its own central nervous system and the gut's got the enteric nervous system, and they're communicating via the vagus nerve.
Mm.
And so if you have anxiety and depression, you are sending a stress signal directly to your gut anyway.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to From Darkness to Light, a conversation series where I talk to global pioneers of healing in order to discuss the subject of anxiety and depression. In this episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Elen ApThomas. She is an integrative and holistic general practitioner from the Medical Sanctuary in Benoa, Queensland. With over 20 years clinical experience, Dr. Elen blends conventional medicine with nutritional, evidence-based complementary approaches, truly treating the root causes of the ailments and not just the symptoms. I had to go back to school in this podcast. There was such a wealth of medical knowledge, but she finds a way to make it simple and practical. We discuss cells, inflammation, and brain and gut health. So I hope you can get something from it. If you do, make sure to click the like and subscribe button. Enjoy. Dr. Elen ApThomas, thank you so much for being here with me. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking.
No problem. I'm really excited to have this conversation because I feel like we will be able to really get down to the nitty-gritty of how we can address some of these problems that we have now in Western society. And you are a general practitioner with over 20 years experience, and you have been combining it with a holistic approach. And I wondered whether you have seen an increase in anxiety and depression in people, or whether we have always been this way. And because of the information age and the way information is disseminated now, that we are just kind of seeing the effects that we've always sort of been afflicted by, or whether there has been this stark rise in anxiety and depression in people, and what's your kind of experience with that?
I would have to say that there does appear to have been an increase in the incidence of anxiety and depression, and I think modern society has made people feel I think under more pressure. I think there's more stresses within families. I think there's potentially less downtime, than there used to be. So I think it's wonderful that people now know that you can seek help, and people are probably feeling more comfortable to talk about it. I think there's a lot less shame involved now.
Mm.
And I suppose in recent times we've had world wars and things that didn't exist, prior to that in human evolution, at a scale that, the now exists. So it is hard to get exact statistics, but yes, I would have to say that the stresses on the average person are higher, and maybe we overthink things now. Maybe there's a lot more analysis of just the survival strategies that we've got to bring in. We're no longer worrying about just some, saber-toothed tiger coming and eating us. We're worrying about the next email, and we're worrying about stresses between family members and where we're going to get enough money to pay the rent now. So, yeah, I think the pressures on life are higher.
Yeah, and I guess that these sort of fight or flight responses that we have are actually triggering biological, historical feelings within us that are akin to a saber-toothed tiger chasing us. We just don't
Yeah.
have it in that same way, but our fight or flight
Yes.
response is lit up in just exactly the same way, but it might be over, like you said, mundane things or things that we have to do in daily life. But our cortisol levels and our stress levels are just as high as if we do need to run away from that saber-toothed tiger or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
absolutely, absolutely, and as well, the brain will respond to things that are imagined the same as things that are actually real. So if we're worrying about, 100 things that may or may not happen, our brains will respond as though they are happening.
Hmm. So if I am to look at myself and look at my body and try and get to the root physically of what may be causing my anxiety and depression. We spoke briefly before, and we were going to sort of attack this within three ways. What would be the first primary fundamental thing that we could look at in ourselves and understand, um, and we can find a way to sort of simplify this for people to
Okay.
start breaking down where the root of our anxiety and depression might be coming from.
Yes. I mean, I suppose if we start with inflammation,
Mm,
there is now an understanding that what we're calling this neuroimmune inflammatory response is a big contributing part to depression and anxiety. So, in our brain, 10% of the brain are these microglial cells that are basically the immune response within the brain. And what the immune response is looking for is how to respond to any threat that's going on within our brain. So it responds to any chronic inflammatory process. So we now know that stress creates a chronic inflammatory response within the brain. That if we've got chronic infections, or if we have an autoimmune condition, or if we are sleep deprived, there is this constant activation of the immune system trying to help us respond to that. But in doing that, it produces these inflammatory cytokines, these molecules that also damage the brain at the same time and interfere with the brain producing our happy neurotransmitters, specifically things like serotonin that we know help regulate mood. So we're then wanting to look at testing that can look at what kind of inflammation is going on in the body, and are there certain deficiencies in vitamins and minerals that might mop up some of this inflammation and help the body cope in a less inflammatory way with what's going on, or can we find an infection that is contributing to this? And often these infections are chronic gut imbalances, and
okay.
there are great tests now that we've got. I'm assuming you've got them in the UK as well, where we send away a sample of people's bowel motion, and we're looking now at all the levels of good and bad organisms that are in there, and they're all producing their own metabolites that then cross over and get into our brain and are contributing to the way we feel as well.
Okay. So, what is the actual role of inflammation itself? Does it have a positive role? Is it trying to help us, and we're sort of, we're succumbing to collateral damage when it comes to that, or is it actually trying to help us? What's the role of it?
Yeah. I think the simple way of thinking about it is short term, it's good. It's there to recognize a trauma within the body or recognize a threat and mount a response that will either heal it or help our immune system respond to obliterating the threat. The problem occurs when it goes on, and I don't think our bodies were ever designed to have this sort of chronic, ongoing threat, immune and neurological response that is now occurring.
Hmm. So, what is the function that drains this inflammation, and what can help mitigate it, or at least if it's a helpful function in that moment, then what turns it on and off?
Yeah. Look, I don't think it's ever totally off. I think it's probably an amount of an intensity level. We certainly know that there are good herbs that have a good anti-inflammatory effect in the body and in the brain. And turmeric has been well
Mm.
researched, and there's a good turmeric extract that can certainly help the brain inflammation. Saffron as a herb can be very powerful. Things like vitamin D, if the levels are low, replacing that is extremely beneficial. Things like your zinc, vitamin C, obviously in doses that are, measured.
Mm,
And not high doses of these things, but we certainly know that B vitamins can have a beneficial effect as well. But if we look at the cause of those things for each person, then we say, okay, well, if your cause is chronic stress, well, or you're not sleeping well, or you're not eating well, then there are some obvious lifestyle modifications that we want to look at. But my job is to say, okay, what can we measure? What blood tests can we look at? What gut testing have we got? Can we find an infection somewhere that might actually need to be treated?
mm.
In a holistic medical sense.
So there's a couple of things because it used to be that you would just take a certain amount of vitamin D, and then the sort of amount that you could take of vitamin D sort of increased. And now
Mm,
it's trendy that actually you need something called K2 in order to
mm,
absorb vitamin D, and that wasn't necessarily the
mm.
case before. So
Yes.
are these medical advancements that are happening, or are they just trends that are getting us to buy more stuff with the vitamins that we already have?
Look, I think I would have to say it's probably because our knowledge is getting better.
Mm,
Um, Vitamins and minerals never work alone. If you look at food, um, pretty well everything that you find vitamin D in nature, there's often a K element.
mm.
And it makes sense that that is when you're going to actually utilize those nutrients
Okay.
better.
Okay, amazing. And similar with vitamin C, it's something that, can be loaded if somebody maybe has very low vitamin C. I think that's something that uh I don't know whether it's something that you can overdo, or is it something that just comes out naturally when you pee? Or are there certain
I
levels?
think I think vitamin C certainly can be overloaded in people, and I must admit I think it's concerning when people take high doses of isolated vitamins. The same, I think vitamin C, works in cooperation with a lot of other nutrients as well, and it can be quite acidic, and it can cause irritation of the gut.
Mm,
And a lot of people are having high dose intravenous vitamin C, which
mm,
can irritate the veins, and prolonged periods of that, I think, are potentially harmful. So this is why I think it's important that people don't go off on their own, and try to manage their
mm,
condition, because that person may not actually need vitamin C at all. It might
mm.
be something totally different, and we are all individual with these things.
Yeah, and I guess that, too much of anything is can be bad,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
these things are putting a stress on the liver and the kidneys and things like this.
Mm,
So we're
yeah.
kind of
And some people have enzyme deficiencies that actually make it very dangerous, to take vitamin C as well. So, I think it's an industry that I think is hard to regulate. But I
yeah.
think if you've got a practitioner that understands, conventional and the holistic side of things, that's the safest way to go.
Yeah, and we're in this kind of this weird place where we in the world now where we don't know truth, and even when it comes to the supplement world, now we're finding out that some supplements are completely fake, and they're
Yeah.
parroting other companies, and what you think is a good product off Amazon could be something that is has absolutely zero benefit, or are using actually harmful things for your body, and
Mm,
people are ending up in
mm.
hospital or whatever because they're buying fake
Yeah,
vitamins these days.
absolutely. And then the whole industry gets a bad rap, which is not right either, Mm.
Okay, so then now we're kind of bridging that into the gut space, and
Yeah,
I guess with modern living, the way we're eating, that is naturally going to have an effect on our gut. And
mm,
so what? How do we start, or at least what are the signs that we need to start healing our gut? And then how do we
yeah,
actually start doing
yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, look, I think the understanding is if you've got something going on in your brain, you've got something going on in your gut, whether you're feeling symptoms or not. We know that the brain's got its own central nervous system and the gut's got the enteric nervous system, and they're communicating via the vagus nerve.
Mm,
And so if you have anxiety and depression, you are sending a stress signal directly to your gut anyway. And then there's this world of this microbiome in the gut now that we're starting to understand, where that's where 100 trillion organisms are living in there, and they are bacteria and funguses and parasites and viruses. And it used to astound me that we've got 3 times the number of organisms in our gut than we even have cells in our body. And these bacteria and these organisms are producing all these metabolites, and they're crossing over into the bloodstream and getting over into the brain and affecting our mood. And I think this is why it's good that we've now got these great tests to actually give us more information about what is going on in each of our guts individually.
Hmm. So when it comes to things like boosting these good bacterias and there's so much stuff now with and
Yeah,
adverts with yogurts and all sorts of things that they
yeah,
say,
yeah,
boost your
yes,
good bacteria, boost your good
yeah,
bacteria. And
yeah,
first of all, people were, it was a probiotic, and now you can take a prebiotic, and now you can do all of
yeah,
this stuff.
yeah,
And it
yes,
can be so confusing as to
yeah,
what you do. And some people say, yeah, fine, you should be taking a probiotic every day. And some people say no, because that might influence your gut in a way to think, well, actually, I don't need to make these probiotics anymore, or I don't need
yeah,
to. And
yeah.
like, you have this thing called lazy gut and things like this. So,
Mm,
what's the actual truth
mm.
behind all of this? What do we actually need?
Yeah. Look, I think the reality is that nobody knows the 100% answer to that question, but we're getting closer all the time. The I think this is where, if you're actually analysing people's gut individually and doing the test, you get much closer to what each person individually needs, and we are all different. I think the other thing to understand is that all of these different probiotics that they're selling all have different levels of clinical research as well. And that there are a couple of strains that have been shown to have a beneficial effect on depression and anxiety. And one of them's a Lactobacillus helvetica strain, and the other one's a Bifidobacteria longum strain. And you want to match the condition to the probiotics that you're putting in each person, because the probiotics are meant to go in there and help the immune system not overreact to anything bad that's going on in there, which is why they seem so important, especially, at birth and when your immune system is in an immature state. But for the anxiety and depression, I'd be wanting to focus more on those organisms that have been shown to have a clinical effect. Now, they won't work for everyone. And what we don't know is, when we put these probiotics in, we don't know how long they last. And the theory is you might put them in and they maintain the benefit for 5 days, and then they're gone. So I don't think probiotics ever cause a permanent change in the bowel. I think it's temporary. So I don't think people need to worry about putting them in. But I think if you're taking a probiotic for a month or two and it's not doing anything, then I'd stop doing it. You either need a different probiotic, or there's something else going on that isn't being addressed.
Okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and then we were gonna sort of, after addressing gut health, I mean, maybe there's some more we can uh say on that in terms of the natural foods that
Mm,
we can now start
mm,
eating,
yes. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is actually helping us in that way. Are there specific things or ways that we can start including into our diet
Yes.
that can
Yeah.
help that?
Yes. And look, and a lot of people, don't like talking about food because it's pretty obvious and it's pretty boring. The things that we probably all know we should be eating. But
Yeah, of course.
you know, I mean, I suppose, well, if we start with the good stuff, and we know that the more um fiber and the more antioxidants and these polyphenols, all these beautiful bright colors and antioxidants in our food. So, your good old fashioned vegetables and fruits and whole grains and legumes, and the Mediterranean diet had it pretty much covered.
Yeah.
And it seems to not only improve the numbers of good bacteria, but the diversity of the species as well. So it's not just how many good ones, it's how many different types of good ones have we got in there. And they all seem to work as a bit of a sort of a family. They all seem to work stronger together. So if you eat your typical, standard American diet, if you're increasing your sugar and if you're increasing your saturated fat, and if you're having things like preservatives and artificial sweeteners, we know these things not only increase the number of bad bacteria, but certain things will keep damaging the lining of the gut, and a lot of these chemicals that we're putting in our food directly irritate the lining of our gut. And then we're getting an inflammatory response to those as well.
So can our gut start to heal that lining by itself as we start to change our diet?
Very much so. Oh, absolutely. And every 5 days you're getting a huge relining of the cells in the gut. It's
Interesting.
a very dynamic process.
And I've heard that all of the cells in the body can start to fully regenerate. And I think it's like a 7 year period where every single
Yeah, I
cell
think
in your body,
that's,
that's the
yeah.
kind of the clickbait
Hmm.
thing of like every seven
Mm.
years, all of your cells regenerate. Is that true for everybody, or are there, people who might struggle to have that sort of regeneration of cells, or is that just a standard thing for everybody?
Look, I think it's the average. I think cells do need a lot of energy to keep regenerating, and they need a lot of healthy mitochondria. So they need the cells in the cells that create the energy in order to do those processes. And I'm sure it's probably something that slows down as we get older, or if we're in a very inflamed state. Inflammation seems to make all our processes in our body more difficult and less efficient.
So that takes us nicely onto our cellular processes. And
Mm.
these are like these little battery packs inside of us that
Yeah,
are
yeah,
regenerating us.
yeah,
Um,
yes,
and so how do we actually keep those things charged?
yeah,
And what
yes,
might the effects be if we do have low cellular energy?
yeah, yeah. Well, look, obviously, every cell in our body needs energy. The brain is a very energy-rich organ. 20% of the cell energy, these mitochondria, little organelles, are little rod-shaped organelles that live inside our cells that create this ATP, this energy, and 20% of them are in our brain. And what we find is if the mitochondria aren't producing energy adequately, then we're not producing and releasing our neurotransmitters either. So it has a huge implication in depression. And this is where anything that affects our energy generally will have a huge impact on ourselves, both mentally and physically. So this is where you'd want to be doing testing to look at energy hormones, things like thyroid and adrenal hormones, and the other nutrients that are specifically responsible for energy, like iron, B12, magnesium. And then if we look at what the mitochondria needs, that's a little bit different to that. There's supplements like CoQ10 and carnitine and alpha lipoic acid, and they're much more sort of specific for helping the mitochondria to work more effectively. But if you've got a big inflammatory process going on in your body, if there's an infection in the gut, or if you're eating things that are inflaming you, or there's chronic stress, then that inflammation will actually damage the mitochondria and will stop it producing the energy to do all those things.
And when you have damaged cells, I'm guessing the body has a sort of response where it naturally sort of tries to kill off these cells that aren't working
Mm,
correctly.
yes.
But we're sort of at the moment, um, are we intaking things that is making that process harder for our body to sort of swat out these cells that are dying and aren't working correctly?
Yeah, well, the immune system's primarily doing that job. It's meant to see that a cell is abnormal and basically dissolve it, and eat it and recycle all the nutrients for the rest of the body to use. And that's certainly something that we see as occurs when people look at intermittent fasting,
That's right.
and giving the body a rest, which also helps the gut environment as well. And it's certainly something, if people have never gone down that path before, it's something I think you need to be gentle with. And this is where we say, look, just eat in an 8-hour window in a day, so you've got a good 16 hours where your body really is resting, and these incredible regenerative processes can start occurring, and it starts lowering inflammation and lowering your insulin level. And a lot of people have found that they do feel dramatically improved for doing that.
Yeah, because I think now again we're sort of learning about this intermittent fasting thing, and it's become very trendy, but people might not necessarily understand the actual process that's going on behind it. But these are things
Mm,
that have been practiced for years in Eastern philosophy, where you would fast for 3 days around a full moon, and it would sort of be something that would reset the entire gut and the entire body by doing this. But like you said,
mhm,
it's probably not healthy for people to just go straight in and do that if you've never fasted
mm.
before. You have people
No,
come
because it can be quite a shock. Yeah, there's a
chronic.
lot of, a lot of things that can start, dying in your gut if you don't feed them, and people can feel quite awful. So it can be scary if you're not being, supervised by someone.
Yeah, so we've got to sort of be gentle with the process there, rather than just going straight in. Um, I wanted to kind of touch on the neurotransmitter side of things, and this sort of connection that we have with our gut and our brain and serotonin, and how important is serotonin in making us feel good, and are we sort of getting to a place now where our dopamine responses are more important to us than actually our serotonin levels? And how do we measure that? How do we understand that, hey, actually I might be sort of overdosing on dopamine, and actually what I actually need to do is balance out my serotonin levels.
Mm, mm. And look, I suppose with the rise of ADHD diagnoses, I think everyone's starting to understand that dopamine is clearly a pretty important, neurotransmitter. Um, I think it's a little bit of I think if someone has an emotional brain inflammatory process going on, you're probably going to find that a lot of neurotransmitters are all being affected all at the same time. And we don't have great medication for things other than the serotonin reuptake inhibitors as drugs, or, your stimulants for ADHD. And so people are starting to realize, oh, if I take this serotonin improving medication, this is how I feel, but some of my symptoms are left behind. And now, the stimulant ones are balancing this. And now we know there's noradrenaline and, epinephrine and all these other neurotransmitters that we don't have medications for, and we really don't know how to balance well. Um, Serotonin definitely seems the one most responsible for a happiness feeling. But I think a lot of people, there's a crossover of, well, what came first? Was I anxious first and then the depression came after that? Or now that I'm depressed, I'm now anxious as well. So I think it's something that is not easily classified like that, in my opinion. Um, this is where what we know is if we can help reduce the cause of the problem and look at the inflammatory processes or the energy processes, that the brain seems to balance our neurotransmitters in ways that's way cleverer than we quite understand yet.
Can this be linked back to our ability to focus? Are we really struggling to focus on one thing? Because, like you said, now there's a rise in ADHD. There's all of this different stimuli, which clearly causes
Mm,
us problems with our focus and our attention. Um,
yes,
and
yes.
and we are always exciting that dopamine response, and
Yes,
we're constantly looking, and like you said, that's a sort of biological response, so that, for example, if we were walking for long distances and then we finally found water, we'd have that dopamine response, which would help us sort of remember where that water was,
yes,
and that was
yes.
the original kind of application for it.
Mm,
But
mm,
now we're excited by everything, and we're constantly
yes,
searching for that to lift our mood, and we have this
yes,
inability now to focus. So
yes.
I guess that's kind of is that's leading us to a link between the benefits of something like meditation and how this can
Mm,
start transforming. Can meditation start transforming our neurotransmitters and our gut and our inflammation? Is there a
mm,
link? Is there a
mm,
genuine link
mm,
there,
mm.
or
Yes.
are people right to think, that's woo woo, and I can, that they don't. There's not really a
Mm,
correlation there.
mm. Well, the science is now showing that this chronic stress response directly causes inflammation, within the brain and the gut. And so if you're performing, meditation, then you are specifically lowering your stress responses. You're specifically lowering your stress hormone, which we know then reduces the inflammatory response within the gut and the brain, actually at a chemical, scientific level. So absolutely, the proof is there.
I read about a study with rabbits, and they were giving two groups of rabbits the same food, but this food would cause high cholesterol potentially in each group of
Mm,
rabbits. But the one group of rabbits was left alone, and they had no human connection and no touch.
hmm
And the other
hmm
group of rabbits had constant care from humans. They were picked up, they were petted,
mm,
and
mm,
it showed that the group of rabbits that had this connection and love, that actually they
mm,
didn't have higher cholesterol, even though they were getting the same food as the other rabbits, and the other rabbits
yeah,
who didn't have
yeah,
that connection were developing high
yes,
cholesterol. So is
yes,
there even a
yes.
link between community and the love between people and
Mm,
all of these
mm,
responses, and
mm, mm,
actually, things that our body should be able to deal with in small amounts, like the toxins and the things that we're eating that aren't so good for us. But if we're
mm,
actually in a good place in life, then our body kind
yeah,
of should be able to deal with these things. But
yes,
is
yes.
that a genuine connection there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is when we get into, another hormone, which is oxytocin, which is that love bonding, hormone that's released when, mothers and children breastfeed and with that community support and nurturing. And that definitely has a calming anti-inflammatory effect on the body and on the gut, and that would have a positive impact on your cholesterol levels. And interestingly, there is a probiotic which is a Lactobacillus reuteri strain that has been shown to improve your oxytocin levels in the brain as well. So yeah, there's very definitely a link. Mm,
Wow, that's so fascinating. Um, and I feel like, yeah, we can really count on the fact now that all of these experiences that we have are completely interlinked. And it seems through this conversation that we have these root things like inflammation, that and that connection between the brain and the gut biome,
mm,
and that are really the crux of, physically anyway, of our symptoms and what we're going
mm,
through, and that actually
mm,
our emotional responses to things are very tightly linked with what's going on inside our body.
mm,
And for some reason, we seem to think that our mental body and our physical body are completely estranged from each other. And
mm,
for some
mm.
reason, we've been conditioned in a way to not see these things as working together.
Yes, yes.
I liked what you said about there being, when you have a healthy gut, then you have all sorts of different strains and they're working together like a family, just like how you, when you have a successful ecosystem. Like my mother, she has a beautiful garden, and because she has all these different plants, we see all these different types of birds in the garden and all of these different types of nature
Mm,
that's then attracted to it. So the macro then is mirroring the micro in that
mm,
sense, and whatever's going on inside of us, we can see happening outside of us. And when you have,
yeah.
when you don't have that complex diversity, then you start to see things go into entropy.
Mm,
Um,
absolutely. Yes.
so I guess what can be something that, if someone is struggling with anxiety and depression, and they think they do have this sort of chronic inflammation and they have gut issues and stuff, what would you recommend they do first of all?
Yeah.
Um,
Look, and I suppose it's I suppose it's important that if people are suffering severely, if people have uh, severe depression, and suicidal thoughts. And, I think we've got to make sure that people do go and see, a medically trained doctor to talk about options.
Yeah.
And everything that you and I have talked about can be often used in conjunction with any other medication that people may or may not need. Um, but I think it's important that they know that they can go and see a practitioner and look at blood tests, look at gut tests, have hormones level measured, talk to someone about their diet seriously, talk to them about whether probiotics are suitable for them and what strain would be suitable because of their condition. Look at their stress management, look at their sleep, and of course have their vitamins and minerals tested. And then we can look at replacing anything that is deficient, look at any chronic infections that might be there, treat that, balance up whatever gut testing results come back, and see if we can actually start getting some chronic stress management strategies into their life, be it meditation, be it yoga, be it exercise, and be it that sleep training. I think people underestimate the power of exercise, and that's something we didn't talk about, but there's a lot of research to show that exercise will improve the amount of mitochondria that you have in your body so that you can start managing the way your energy mechanisms and inflammation are working in your brain just by going and doing some more exercise. So I just don't want people to discount that because there's a lot of research in there for people.
So am I correct in saying that that it's the lymphatic system that is helping drain our bodies drain this inflammation, and the lymphatic system sort of works on a pump. So you need to move in order to get the lymphatic system moving in order to help your body start to drain this inflammation. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the lymphatics, I suppose, keep the fluid moving, and there is a large part of our immune system is in the lymphatics, and there's a huge amount of that within the gut as well. So there's an immune system that's separate to the lymphatics, but of course everything needs blood flow, and if you aren't draining an area, it's more difficult to get new blood flow to that area as well.
Hmm.
And exercise certainly does have a good effect on stimulating circulation, of the lymphatics within the brain, and within the gut, but also improves the actual energy mechanisms that every cell in the body needs, in order to manage this inflammation as well.
Yeah, well, we're pretty sedentary creatures now, aren't we? We sort of
Well,
we sit
sadly, yes, it's
we
not how we were designed, was it?
no, we sit at desks all day and then we go home and we're tired mentally, and then we sit down all night and maybe we have a microwave meal, and then
Mm.
and because of that we're not getting great sleep, or we're on our phone till late at night, and
Mm.
that's keeping
Mm.
us up, and so then it's just a vicious cycle, and it gets
Mm.
harder and harder to get off of that
Yeah,
hamster
yeah,
wheel.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I
Mm.
feel like this conversation has at least give us some practical ways of attacking that, and knowing that there are physical symptoms that you can then look at and tick box and go through is really
Mm.
hopeful to me in that sense, because it shows that
Mm.
it's not just something where your mind is sort of bothering you and you can't quite get a hold of it, because the
Mm.
mind can be that
Mm.
way where it feels very
Mm.
ghostly, and you
Yes.
can't quite get a hold of what's going on with you, and the depression is
Mm.
something which sort of sweeps in like a toxic nuclear wind, and
Mm.
again,
Mm.
it's something hard to capture, and it's something that you can get lost in a whirlwind within. But if there are
Mm.
real tangible physical elements that are compounding and causing
Mm.
that process, then actually that's quite a hopeful thing, because I think that some people go through that process of healing their gut, healing their body, and actually they heal themselves way quicker than they could have imagined that they heal themselves.
Mm.
And these
Mm.
sort of processes that you're trying to work through psychologically actually just sort of just fade away as the body sort of snaps back into equilibrium.
Yes, yes, absolutely. No, it is very exciting, and it does give people a greater sense of control, over their emotional environment.
I think I'd like maybe we can touch on, just to finish the conversation, do you think our bodies, because I hear this a lot now in spiritual circles, and it would be interesting to get your take on it. Are our bodies going through a cellular upgrade?
Um,
Is that even possible?
See, the science part of my brain goes, well, it's very hard to quantify that. I'm certainly seeing people go through an, an improved level of awareness, which I would interpret as, an up level, of humanity. I think we're becoming more aware of how important compassion is, and more aware of treating the earth more kindly and ourselves more kindly, and that there is a connection between our spirit and our mind and our body, that's
Mhm.
becoming now undeniable. So yes, I suppose there's lots of different words, but
Yeah,
there's
it's a
certainly
difficult, yeah,
certainly that going on.
yeah, it's a difficult subject, but I guess it makes total sense if we can correlate that meditation is actually helping these physical processes in our body, then it would
Mm,
make sense that as our awareness gets wider and we can focus better, and that actually improves all of these things, these systems that are going on in our body.
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Wow, that was such a packed conversation in such a small amount of time. And there's so much that I definitely want to go back and re-listen to unpack. But that I really think that's going to be super helpful for people, just to be able to break down very complex things that are out in the world now, that that are becoming trendy, but I think sometimes are quite inaccessible because there's just
Mm,
so much
mm,
information, and
yes, yes,
sometimes you just don't know where to start with this stuff,
yeah,
and
yes,
because you get
yes,
flooded with this is this and this is good for this and this is this and this, and you just have no
yep,
idea where to start. And I think a lot of people are
yeah,
in decision paralysis in
absolutely,
that sense, and
yeah,
even that
yes,
itself can cause an anxiety and depression.
yes, yes, absolutely. No, well, look, it's absolutely beautiful that you're bringing all of this to the world. So I think the world's very lucky to have you. So thank
Oh,
you.
well, it's extremely lucky to have you, and I'm extremely lucky to be having this conversation. So, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and giving the time to do this, Dr. Ellen. I really, really appreciate it, and I think it will be super helpful for people.
Thank you, Matreya.
So,
Well, that is lovely. Thank you very much.
thank you very much.